we may or may not have been comfortable making friends as kids. Everyone sort of lies on a different part of the spectrum there. But what's kind of universally shared is that by the time we're an adult, whether you have a family or not, whether you're working a full-time job or not, we tend to change. We tend to be more protected, tend to be more suspicious. We tend to be less open, less vulnerable. And making new friends very often gets harder. Not for everybody, but from what I've seen, for most people, certainly for me, I'm raising my hand when I say that. I'm like, I am a member of that club. And I think a lot of times also we rely on the friends that we made from as far back as we can imagine because they know us the best and we trust them the most and they trust us the most. And we know that it takes a certain investment of energy and a risk of exposing who we are to make new friends. And once we're a little bit further into life, a lot of times we just don't want to go there. Like we're navigating and grappling with so much that the idea of spending that energy, of putting ourselves out, of taking the risk of not being accepted, it's just too much. So we kind of shut down and we accept, our friendship lot for the moment that we're in, and sometimes for life. And I'm sharing this because in no small part I'm describing myself. I love people, but I'm also introverted. I love people, and I'm also what Elaine Aron would describe as a highly sensitive person, which means that in part, I get sensitive in social situations to the extent where even loud noises or being in an environment that's super noisy for an extended period of time can make me start to withdraw. So I've had to figure out, okay, how do I have a vibrant set of friends and regular interaction with them and actually, quote, put myself out there, knowing that I'm actually pretty happy hanging out. I'm literally like in a recording studio where the walls are on either side of me and they're all padded. It's as quiet and cozy as you can get. Like, how do I step out of this setting? Or how do I invite people into this setting and create those friendships that aren't just superficial, but change you and sustain you for life? I run a couple of companies right now, but one is called Good Life Project. And we're most known, I think, these days for the podcast that we create. But bigger picture, for 5 years, when you zoom the lens out, we actually ran an adult summer camp where for generally the last 4 days of summer, every summer for 5 years, we would drop into this 160-acre kids sleepaway camp. Of course, after they clean the whole place out, because there was a lot of cleaning to do after the kids. And it was this great facility and it was kids bunks, they weren't winterized or summerized. You get what you get, a dozen bunks to each building. And we would kind of swoop in and we'd take it over. And we would spend the better part of the entire year figuring out how to create this near magical environment. And then we would welcome, by the end, we're welcoming about 450 people every year. They would come on planes, trains, automobiles. They would come from the other side of the world. We had people from Australia. Like literally, they would travel from the other side of the planet to get to this place to spend 4 days, often with total strangers. And very often they would come alone. They didn't come as a group, although they'd always leave as a group. And, we learned over that 5-year window that there were a lot of things that we could do, that we could think through. There are a lot of mechanisms that we could create. There was an ethos that we could cultivate. We could be very intentional about creating a dynamic that allowed total strangers who were often just stepping off of 24 hours of flying, multiple connections, 14-hour time difference, crossing the date line, to drop into this place in the middle of the country in a kids sleepaway camp, sleep a dozen to a bunk in like tiny little kids sleeping bunks, by the way, share bathrooms, and be amazingly comfortable and have it be this stunning experience, where our favorite thing to know would be like they came alone and they would leave with lifelong friends. So let's talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we learned through this 5-year experience of running our own adult summer camp. It's kind of fun. One of the first lessons that we really learned is that we needed to create what I called a safe container. Now, we did this in the context of, like we literally took over a kids sleepaway camp. We removed people from their day-to-day environment. So all the stresses, all the distractions coming at you, all the devices that you're like distracting yourself with, like the phone calls, everything, the people bumping into you, none of that existed. So one of the things I realized is incredibly powerful is if you literally remove yourself to a place where it's almost you're stepping out of the ordinary world and into the extraordinary world. And you can almost think of this as the hero's journey of friendship. It's sort of what Joseph Campbell wrote about when he talked about the hero's journey. At some point, you cross the threshold and you leave the ordinary world and you step into the extraordinary world. And in my mind, making really deep new friendships, you could really see as a hero's or a heroine's journey. And it starts by stepping out of the ordinary world and into the extraordinary world. And we want to create a safe container for people to step into. And like I said, you can do that in the virtual space too. Brendan's done it. The whole team has done it in this community that we have here. So what actually makes it safe? Well, the physical environment, we wanted to really remove distractions. We want to create emotional safety also. And part of that we do by actually creating what I would call a shared ethos or a shared value set. So when people would think about coming to camp, one of the things that they would actually think about is, well, will the people there be my people? Well, how do we know if they're my people? Same thing if you're like kind of thinking about, well, do I approach this other person, maybe make a new friendship? I'll know, are they my people? Because if they're not my people, then this could get ugly fast. It's gonna be a really uncomfortable conversation, and I'm gonna feel awkward, and then I'm gonna run for the door, and then so that can still happen, and that's kind of the fun of actually putting yourself out there. Says the guy who hides in a digital cave as he speaks to you, and but what we did was, we realized that we needed to actually somehow telegraph our values and beliefs so that people could kind of like, before they even step into it, be like, oh yeah, I kind of see the world like this person and these people in this community. The way we did that was a couple of ways. I mean, number one, we had a lot of people who were listening to the podcast over a period of weeks and months and years. They started to understand my personal value set and know that that was a part of the community that we were creating. So they built it around what they knew of me. But we also wanted to separate it from me. And we actually created what I called a living creed. So this was a statement of belief. Some people might call it a manifesto. It was basically a one-page statement of beliefs and statement of values. And we published that for years. It was actually sort of front and center on our website. And we would make that also a part of camp. We say, this is what we believe in. If you go to the Good Life Project website now, for example, and look at the About page, we don't have that creed up there anymore. But it's really clear reading our story, what our values and beliefs are, what we aspire to, and what's meaningful to us, what's important to us. And I think we do that, in the digital domain by kind of like putting it out there. And this was in the context of somebody saying yes to an experience that would potentially allow them to create new friendships. So we can do that on an individual basis also. We may not necessarily put out like a statement of values and beliefs, but what we don't realize is we're actually doing that all day, every day. Old school version of that is, a lot of it was about what we wore. I'm a big fan of printed t-shirts, and the olden days where you go to concerts and you'd always come home with your concert t-shirt, and basically, whoever you were wearing said a lot about who you were, what your values were, what was important to you, the type of things that you liked. And that actually telegraphed a lot of it. These days, when we're trying to actually get a beat on, well, like, could this person be an interesting friend? And maybe we kind of want to know a little bit more about them before we even approach them. Social media has become the new printed t-shirt. So many people are out there on Instagram and Facebook and these days Discord and all the different platforms. And we're sharing all day, every day. And we're not only sharing our own stuff, we're sharing other people's stuff that resonates with us. And what we're effectively doing is We are we're identifying an ethos around our values, our beliefs, our hopes, our aspirations, our fears, our desires, and we are publishing that to the world to say, know me. We don't realize necessarily that's why we're doing it. We're just like, hey, this is fun or this is cool. We're putting it out there. But what's happening underneath the surface is we are sharing a deeper part of ourselves, and in part because we want to be known, but in part what it also does is it creates it telegraphs something that leads in front of us should we then meet somebody or somebody want to actually reach out to us and become friends, because they'll say, hey, we see the world similarly, we share similar values and beliefs, and I want to know you. And it makes that conversation a little bit more comfortable. It creates that safety that I was talking about. It's one of the things that goes into creating a safe container that can potentially lead to friendship. The topic for today and really for the month, advanced mindset and resilience. The way that I think about resilience when I think about it is the ability to move through moments and sometimes entire seasons of adversity, so that the experience of moving through it, the experience of interacting with it, the experience of dancing with it is something where you can access the greatest amount of equanimity, of peace and ease during the experience. I was thinking about what's the strongest experience that I've had where I've had to be incredibly resilient. And I kind of was focusing on business. So we actually run two companies, and one of them is a media company. And we produce this flagship podcast called Good Life Project. We've been doing it for years. We actually started as a video show, filming on location with a crew and cameras. And we transitioned 2 years into that to become pure audio, just a podcast. And we aired twice a week. So we have a very aggressive production schedule. I made a commitment very early on that we were not only going to create the most extraordinary production values that we could, but also the most intimate, the most real, the most open, honest, and revelatory conversations that we could do. We built a place to actually host this where I controlled the entire environment. I would invite people in and they would come in and we would close the door behind them. And we'd sit in these two really comfy chairs with this super plush rug in a pretty intimate setting and with headphones on so we could hear each other in our ears and we could see each other. We're looking at each other. That in-person format, for me, it was sacred. So we're 6 years into this format. We're known for hosting these intimate in-person things where you can literally hear the occasional siren coming through the studio, like the 4 layers of acoustic glass. And my belief, I have this deeply held belief that we cannot host the quality and the depth of conversation that I am comfortable producing if we have to do it remotely. And then all of a sudden, a year ago hits. We had a quick meeting with the team and said, okay, we can't do this anymore. We can't, this thing that we've held so sacred, our entire business, our pride, my ego, the brand was built around the extraordinary quality of the conversations and the production value of being in a studio, being up close with these really super high quality microphones and no echo and things like that. We had to make a decision because we were faced with mass disruption. And remember last year, everything kind of hit New York very early in the year. And New York just started to shut down everything. It was like the dominoes were falling in everything. Within a matter of days, the entire city is just shutting down. And we're thinking to ourselves, okay, so if we stick to this ethos, we're going to go on hiatus, or we're literally going to shut down the company and the community and the podcast. And we had other shows that we had started to work on developing as well. So the choice was, we didn't want this level of disruption. We didn't ask for it. We didn't see it coming. Nobody saw it coming. But here it is. This is adversity on the extreme level where it effectively had the potential to take out my entire business. But also, it made me kind of rethink, what are the assumptions? What are the assumptions that have gotten me to this place? And how can I change those assumptions? How can I respond to it? How can I see the possibility side of what's happening here and not just feel like I'm being pummeled all day, every day by the disruption, by the adversity, because that's the heartbeat of resilience, is being able to see the other story in the face of adversity. So what we did was start to test, and we started to say, okay, so there's a certain amount of forgiveness in the world right now. We all know that we're doing the best that we can. Why don't we take this window of time? Let's experiment. How close can we get to what we were able to do in person in the studio? And what we found was we started testing all these different platforms, and we're like, like sort of like the Goldilocks story, not quite, not quite, not quite. And then eventually we started to land on platforms for different things that were like, you know what? It's not the same as being in the studio, but it's good enough for now. So then we said, okay, how do we take this and try and make it even better? And we started to test a wide range of microphones that were shippable. And we started shipping microphones around to all of our guests. So if anybody didn't have the quality of recording equipment that we felt was important, we would literally buy it for them. And we still do that to this day. We realized that there was a lot that we could do in post-production. So we up-leveled our team. Our editor went into and trained to learn a lot more about post-production. We brought on a high-level sound engineer to fix all sorts of things. And that added a lot to the back end of what we're doing. But what we started to learn over time is that this assumption that I had about the only way that things are going to be okay is if we do it this way. When adversity dropped into my lap, when it sort of exploded into the world and into my world and my business, and I couldn't do it that way anymore. I literally, all the assumptions that I made and all the choices that were based on those assumptions were blown up. I could not keep making those choices. I can either shut it down and cave to adversity, or I can say, okay, so what is the possibility story here? How do we dance with this? How do we move through it? And what we start to realize is this now opens the entire universe to us. So now, if there's a guest in a different country, or if there's a guest across the country, or there's a guest in the Southern Hemisphere, we can now coordinate that. So all of a sudden, we're able to sit down with people who just never would have been able to be on the podcast and in conversation with me. What I discovered was, because so many people are actually doing it from their homes, that the home created its own sense of virtual intimacy or remote intimacy. They were intimate in their space. I was intimate in my space. And that intimacy, even if it was 1,000 miles apart, it bridged the chasm to create this sort of, like virtual ethereal container of safety and sanctity. And that really surprised me. And now, as we sort of like step into what I would consider, emerging our way slowly into a new season, now we're starting to actually think about, well, where do we go from here? When in fact it is safe to be back in a room, back in a studio together, are we going to automatically do that? And my honest answer right now, because we've been so convinced and so blown away and so surprised by dropping our assumptions, by simply kind of surrendering to the truth of the circumstance, and by actively seeking out the possibility story, and then trying to increase the volume of possibility as much as humanly possible, we've been really dramatically surprised, because there are some really powerful benefits to not doing it. So not only do I feel like we have sort of bounced back to the place that we were before, but I think we've balanced forward to a certain extent to increased possibility. We may very well end up doing a hybrid model where we film and we record and we do the audio in studio. And then a whole bunch of other things we do remotely, because now we know how to do that. And because now people we want to speak to and people who want to speak to us, we can bring ourselves together in the virtual space in a way that either never would have happened face to face, or it would have taken months or years to pull the whole thing off. So I think the meta idea, when I think about adversity and resilience, it's sort of like the key for me is really, it's the notion of what I call the possibility story, right? So, and I call it the law of possibility. Is this a proven law? No, but it sounds kind of fun. For every disruption, there is an equal and opposite possibility. So our job in moments of adversity is to ask the question, what is the possibility story? In the real world, confidence is very often unavailable at the moments where you have to make the biggest decisions, and there is no way to actually get it. What we started thinking about here is the fact that it's not about confidence in real life, nor do you want it to be about confidence. It's about the opportunity to be changed by a moment or an experience. Because the truth is, in the real world, the only way to be 100% confident about anything is if you've already done it, or if someone else has already done it. And at that point, confidence doesn't really matter, because when you're 100% confident that it will work and you will succeed, you have simultaneously reduced the stakes to a point where you won't care even if you succeed. It just doesn't matter anymore. So I'm going to propose to you that it's actually not about confidence. That's really not what we're going for here, right? I'm going to propose an alternative frame to you. And that's that it's the moments you're not confident, but find a way to do it anyway, that hold the greatest opportunity for growth. So rather than us trying to figure out how can I get confident, how can I do the things that will make me feel 100% confident, how can I gather the facts or the skills or the information, the things that matter the most, the places where the stakes are the highest and the opportunity for growth and success and amazement and awe and connection and serendipity and impact and purpose and meaning, those experiences, those interactions, those moments, those endeavors and pursuits, guess what? You will never have anywhere close to 100% confidence in your own ability to pull it off, or in the world rallying to support it or you. But you got to find a way to act anyway, because those are the windows. Those are the moments. Those are the seasons of our life when we don't know, but somehow we still act. And when we actually can find a way through, when we keep making decisions and taking actions and keep stepping forward and forward and forward, even when our head is spinning and the world is uncertain and we have very little confidence, we just don't know if it's going to work or not. When we find the ability to do that, and then we progress through it and we take baby steps towards this vision that we have, that is the most magical place to be. It's not even the achievement of the end state that really fuels us up and lights us up. It's the process. It's the process of growing. It's the process of putting yourself in a place where you have the opportunity to be changed by the experience. And if you are 100% confident that you can do it and that the universe will support it and there's no way to fail, it doesn't matter to you anymore. What you have effectively done is made yourself comfortable, but eliminated the opportunity to experience growth. I'm going to suggest something different here. Instead of pursuing confidence, what I'm going to suggest is that we take a different approach, that we cultivate unconfident action meta skills, that we actually intentionally put ourselves in a place on a regular basis where we go out into the world and we don't know how it's going to end, where there's no easy way to have confidence that this is going to work or we will be able to pull it off and still be okay there, because that is the fertile ground of life. So let's talk about some of these skills, okay? I call these the ABCs. The first one is awareness and ease. What I'm talking about here is the ability to see clearly and find peace in the space of groundlessness. So that's really kind of two things, but the practices are related. We want to know that we're looking out into the horizon and we can see as clearly and truthfully as possible, and also looking internally and understanding what is my internal state? How clear can I get about that? I want to become aware of the internal and external states, because that is one of the things that will allow me to make effective decisions rather than spinning all sorts of anxiety-based or doom-based projections, right? We want to become aware And we want to cultivate the practices that will let us feel a sense of ease. The second one is bravery. And what I'm talking about when I talk about bravery is a willingness to act, even when you don't know if it will work. And the third thing, right, this is the C here, is conviction. And when I'm talking about conviction, I'm talking about a deep knowing around why it matters and what the stakes are. So those are what I call the ABCs of cultivating action in the face of unconfidence. Let's start with conviction. So when I talk about conviction here, what I'm really talking about is to ask the why question 5 to 10 times, and then we're going to step away from it, ask it again, and journal. Now, why is this so important in the context of us doing things, knowing that no matter how much we try, there is no one moment where if the stakes are high and we haven't already done it before, that we will ever be 100% confident. So it can be these tiny little moments, or it could be launching something huge into the world or starting a new career. When we do that, we're taking a risk and we're going to stumble along the way. And the bigger it is, the more complex it is, the longer the time frame, the more likely it is that we are going to keep meeting barrier after barrier after barrier. When that happens, one of the things that allows us to continue to take steps and make decisions is understanding why we said yes to it in the first place. But very often, when we ask ourselves, well, why does this matter to me? We come up with a superficial answer at first. And then if we keep drilling down, though, but why does that answer matter to me? And then why does that answer matter to me? And then why does that answer matter to me? So if I'm going to move from one place to an entirely different state or country, I could say, well, I'm moving from New York to Colorado, for example. And I would say, well, there's a lot of risk involved in that. I'm not confident in myself that I'll be able to handle the move and work effectively and be okay. And I don't, but I still have to take some action. And I would say to myself, well, why would it matter to me to be there? Well, because, I love the outdoors and, there's snowboarding nearby. And okay, but why does that matter to me? Well, because there's something about the outdoors. And when I'm snowboarding on a mountain that changes the way that I feel. Okay, and why does that matter to me? Well, because as you get deeper into life, very often, you become more attuned to the passage of time. And I am attuned to that. And I want to know that in whatever time I have on this planet, I'm doing things that allow me to feel connected and alive. And then you keep going like that 2 more times until you get to a place where you get the most authentic answer. And here's what you do then. Instead of writing it down saying, I'm done, you walk away, because the real juice happens after you do that. Because you take a pause, but your brain does not. Your subconscious brain keeps running the script, running the question over and over and over. You don't even realize it. And then 3 days later, you're walking down the street and your brain says, this is the real reason why. And when you get that, you write it down, you write about it, you reflect on it, you journal it, and you put it in print, not by typing it into a computer, but by literally writing it with your hands. It's because it changes the brain. It wires it differently when you memorialize things that way. So you write it down. And this is so important because when you start to stumble, when you hit roadblocks, when things happen that keep you questioning, what happens is when you can revisit the deepest why, it gives you this sense of conviction. It says, oh, this is why this mattered to me. This is what the stakes are. And I care deeply about these stakes. So even though I don't know if I'm going to succeed, I'm not really confident in my ability to pull this off. And I don't know what's going to happen. I'm going to keep taking action because it really, really matters to me. I'm going to let you all know something. So when Brennan came to me and he's like, hey, I said, what's the theme for like the upcoming month? And he's like, focus and discipline. And I'm thinking to myself, that's great because I have none of either. But at the same time, somehow I managed to get a lot of stuff done on any given day. But I started to realize a couple of years back that discipline, that getting astonishing things done, that accomplishing, achieving at the highest level, it was not just an inside game and not just an outside game. It was a blended game. And that so many of us focus on one particular thing. And we end up realizing that we're doing one thing well, we're doing one thing poorly, but we're not getting where we want to go. We don't have the discipline to do it. We don't have the focus to do it. We keep wandering off. And we become really good starters and really terrible finishers. And I know nobody here, of course, I'm talking about myself. When you look at the people who've actually, the world views as having astonishing focus and astonishing discipline and who are able to accomplish incredible things, that there are some commonalities with them. Now, my mind kind of works in frameworks. So I started to really deconstruct a lot of my own experiences, the opportunity that I've had to sit down with hundreds of some of the most accomplished people from literally every domain of life, and then pour into the academic research on everything from goal setting to achievement, to focus, to attention, and things like that, and developed my own framework. And I call it success scaffolding. Now, that scaffolding, think of it as this is a superstructure that you build both around you in your environment, in your relationships, and it's also an infrastructure. It's a structure that you build in your mind, in your body, and they work together to allow you to accomplish astonishing things. They effectively install focus and discipline. And by doing that, they help the likelihood that you're actually going to show up and accomplish amazing things. They help that become your reality. So let's dive into it. We hear these words discipline, we hear the word grit out in the world a lot. I've had the opportunity to sit down in conversation with the primary researcher on grit, Angela Duckworth, a number of times over the years, and really go deep into it. And we hear that, it's this thing that people either have or they don't have, similar to you either have focus or you have discipline or you don't have it. And what we started to realize is that's actually not entirely true at all, that a lot of this stuff is practicable, it's buildable, it's installable. So first one is picture, right? So we want to create a picture of the thing that we want to accomplish or do, or the place we want to go. Large or small, it really doesn't matter. A lot of times we think about that thing we want to accomplish, and we kind of keep it spinning in our minds, right? But we never memorialize it in any meaningful way. And the problem is when we never memorialize it, we don't entirely know what we're working towards. We don't know what it looks like, what it feels like, what it'll be like when we're there, what the fundamental qualities of it will be. So we never really truly understand what is the first step in, because we're not clear exactly on what it is that we want to move towards. So one of the first things we want to do is to create a picture of this thing that we want to move towards or accomplish. So for me, if that's a book, so I literally just turned in the next book a couple of weeks ago, for me, that was getting really, really clear on what this book is going to be. What's the theme? What's the big idea? What's the promise? What are the core ideas and the supporting ideas? But I'm also somebody who's hyper visual. I don't know about you, and I'm a maker. I make ideas manifest. That's my Sparcotype or archetype or impulse for work that makes me come alive. So I needed to go a step further and really envision, what does the physical object look like? And that actually helped me sit down and figure out how I'm going to start working on this thing. So when you create that picture in your mind, you want to do two things: be specific and be sensory. Again, this is all in the mind map. So be specific and be sensory. Be as clear and as granular and as specific as you can get. Behavioral psychologist at Stanford, BJ Fogg, calls this crispifying the idea. Make it really crisp, right? Super clear. It's like you're taking a lens on a camera that's out of focus and turning it so everything comes into super clear focus and you have a lot of specificity in what you're doing. And then make it sensory. Give it sound, give it a visual, give it motion, give it scent, if that's what you want. Make it tactile. What does it feel like? Right? So create this picture, make it as much as you can. If you literally have a camera and you have a sense, people do this all the time now. They create boards, whether you call them pin boards or vision boards or whatever it is, to actually get as detailed, as granular, as visual, and as sensory as you can. You want to create a picture which is detailed enough that it makes you start to feel things. And that becomes really important because your brain actually is a little bit like a GPS. Neuroscientist who works out of Harvard and Harvard Medical School professor Srini Pillai says that when you get super clear on this thing that you want to move towards, create, or achieve, that it becomes like this implanted GPS in your brain. Your neurocircuits actually start to work on the steps that will get you there without you even having any understanding of the fact that your brain is now working 24/7 on getting there. Notice I didn't start where most people start, right? Most people start with making a plan. We're going to get to that. But that is also one of the big stumbling points for so many people. First, you want to get clear on where it is you want to go. Now, before I move on to the second piece, I want to answer a question that comes up very often, which is, what if you just don't know? What if you're not entirely clear? Now, I live and work in the world of business and entrepreneurship and startups. So I work with a lot of founders. And a lot of times when a founder is trying to start something, whether it's a private practice or a platform or business, they have some sense of what they wanted to do and the problem they wanted to solve, but they don't know the details yet. And they kind of know that that's going to unfold over time. So if the thing that you're thinking about accomplishing, if the thing that you want to harness focus and discipline towards is not really super easy to make specific and sensory at this moment in time, zoom the lens out just a touch. And what you want to do is think about, what are the essential qualities of that thing, right? So I know if I'm looking to launch a company, I kind of know the qualities. I know what culture I want, what people I want. I can get a lot more specific in the context of qualities. And while that may not be as effective, that gets me way past just having some sort of nebulous idea spinning in my head. And then be sure to memorialize this, right? Either write it out, like literally like take a page and write out what this picture is, take pictures, draw it, film videos, whatever you need to do to make it real to you. That's what we want to do. I want to focus on something very unique and very specific in my presentation today. So when we think about leadership, there is sort of an old trope, which is it's all about motivation. Like leadership is about motivation. How do I motivate people to do X, Y, or Z so that we can make it happen, really effectively, and then we accomplish the big goal. And as a leader, I feel good about it. And a lot of the conversation around that is, what do we do externally? How do we build better communications so that we really understand what the expectations are and what the mission is and what the vision is, and there's clarity and reinforcement and feedback on progress? How do we build culture in a way that's positive and constructive and generative and respectful and lead with dignity? And all of those things are super important. What I want to focus on is what I call the inside game of leadership. And what sort of has really captured my curiosity for a lot of years is why we do the things we do. A number of years back, Dan Pink, who's a friend, wrote a book called Drive. And he took a really deep look at motivation. What he learned was that, we tend to have one or two things to try and lead people to a particular outcome. You call it a carrot and a stick, the thing that you're working towards or the thing that you're trying to avoid and you're working away from. And he said it's kind of an old model. For us to lead ourselves to work really hard towards a particular desired goal or lead others, teams, groups, people, companies, divisions, something a little bit more innate has to happen. We have to figure out, what is that innate driver of effort that makes us come alive, that nourishes us with a sense of purpose and meaning and flow and expressed potential, and drops us into a place of possibility and belief that things that maybe you didn't even think were possible actually just might be so. So I have spent years now really diving deep into, what are these deeper impulses? What is that innate thing that exists inside all of us, to try and understand how we can harness it, how we can first identify it and then harness it. And I have to tell you, I came to believe something that had you asked me 10, 15 years ago, I probably would have laughed at you if you said this existed. What I came to believe is that we all have a unique imprint for work that makes us come alive. And I call these things your Sparcotypes, your Sparcotypes. Now, what does that actually mean? The Sparcotype is, think of it as two different things bundled together. So first we have an impulse for effort. And we have this impulse. We don't know where it comes from. A lot of folks have asked me, where do these impulses come from? And my answer is, it could be genetic. It could be behavioral. It could be environmental. It could be some blend of all three. Some people may believe that they're preordained by some sort of larger spiritual body. I'm actually kind of not entirely interested in the answer to that question. But what I have come to believe is they're there. And we've now seen that in more than 500,000 people that have been part of an ongoing study for the last 3 years through an assessment that we developed. And what we've learned is that there exist 10 unique impulses or imprints. And this is an impulse where you just feel like you would work really hard, you invest effort and energy in a particular way for no other reason than the way it makes you feel. Now, you may be really well compensated by this. You may be a part of a team where it is incredibly needed and necessary and valued, or you might just do it because it's the thing you can't not do. You know, you may be a parent expressing this impulse in the context of raising a child, or a companion in the context of keeping somebody company, or any other domain. But these impulses are there. And what we've learned over the years, after deconstructing and deconstructing, is that we have 10 of these impulses. And wrapped around each one of these 10 impulses are a series of preferences, behaviors, and tendencies that tend to show up and form archetypes. So I coined the phrase Sparcotypes because it is the imprint or the archetype for work that sparks you, work that makes you come alive. So when I'm talking about the phrase coming alive, I'm talking about effort that gives you a sense of meaning, like who you are and what you're doing actually matters to you and maybe to the world. A feeling of excitement and energy, like full engagement, a feeling that you are easily lost or absorbed in that flow state where everything feels like you're just completely a part of it. Time fugues, you can blink and maybe it's been a minute, maybe it's been 10 hours. A sense that all of your potential is being expressed fully. There's nothing left behind. And more broadly, you have a stronger sense of purpose in life. But I think it would probably be helpful if I just quickly kind of walked you through these 10 different types. So the first type is what we call the maven, right? The maven. Now, the maven, the primary impulse is all about knowledge acquisition. It's about learning. It's driven by a fierce sense of curiosity or fascination. You live to learn, knowledge acquisition. Now we call the second Sparcotype the maker. Now, my primary Sparcotype, and that means my strongest impulse for effort, is the maker. The maker is all about making ideas manifest. We create things. So the energy of creation is the fundamental drive. I literally wake up in the morning and I look around and I'm like, what can I make today? So that's the primary impulse of the maker. Now, the third one is the scientist. And the scientist is all about the burning question, the quandary, the puzzle. The fundamental energy of the scientist is figuring things out. It's problem solving. So let's talk about the next one. We call this the essentialist. Now, the essentialist is all about creating clarity and order from chaos. They're the ones who think often in spreadsheets, processes, systems. It's all about looking at sort of like big complex data sets or tons of things or stuff and organizing it, but not just for the purpose of it being organized, but for the purpose of creating a sense of calmness and clarity. So let's talk about the performer. Now, the performer is all about animating and enlivening interactions, moments, and experiences. The next Sparcotype is what we call the warrior. And the energy of the warrior, the impulse of the warrior, is to gather and lead, So the warrior brings together a group of people, and they're very often one of those people, by the way. They may be affected by something that they want to see change, or maybe they want to go on a great adventure. And they're one of the people who has this Jones. So they bring together a group of people. They kind of bring them all in. They gather them together, and then they step into a leadership position. And they say, okay, here's where we're starting. Here's the mission of where we're going to go. And I am going to lead us there. The energy of a leader is ferocity. So next up, we have what I call the sage. Now, the fundamental impulse of the sage is to instill insight. So the same way that the maven is all about knowledge acquisition, like I'm going to get encyclopedic and bring it all into my head. The sage is all about whatever's in my head. I want it out there. I want to share it with everybody. And most sages, even when they're learning, they're actually learning for the purpose of being a better sharer of knowledge. Next up, we have what I call the advisor. And the advisor is all about guiding people through a process of growth. Very often, the advisor operates in an intimate, trust-based container of safety and respect and dignity. We're getting really close. Final two Sparcotypes here. So the advocate. The advocate is all about championing ideas and ideals. Now, this could be an individual. This could be a community. It could be human beings. It could be the environment. It could be animals, or it could be an idea or a concept. So an advocate may be sitting around a conference room table, and people could be brainstorming and throwing out ideas. And there could be an idea that's really quietly sitting on the side, or maybe somebody told the advocate about their idea beforehand, but they were a very quieter person. They were more introverted. And in a group setting, they weren't comfortable bringing it out and really advocating for it. And the advocate may say, okay, there's this one idea that is super important and super valuable, and we need to center it in the conversation and bring it attention and energy. And that is often an incredibly powerful role. The advocates often become a strong activist. And finally, we bring it home with what I call the nurturer. And the fundamental impulse of the nurturer is all about elevation. It's about giving care and taking care of others. And again, similar to the advisor or similar to the advocate, this may be for an individual. It may be for a small group. It may be animals. It may be the environment. The subject of the nurturing and the elevation, it can be incredibly individual, but they wake up in the morning and there's a fundamental DNA level impulse to nurture, to take care of others, to elevate them for no other reason than the way it makes them feel in the process of doing it and the effect that they actually see on others while they're doing it. So those are the 10 different Sparcotypes that we've talked about. And you may be thinking, well, okay, as I described the different ones, you're like, well, am I that one? Am I that one? Am I that one? Am I that one? And what we've learned through developing an assessment and now having a huge data set that's growing really rapidly by the day is that none of us are just one of these. We tend to be a combination, but we tend to have two really strong impulses sort of like at the top of our spectrum, and also on the other side, a very weak one. We call the two ones your primary and your shadow Sparcotype. Your primary is your strongest impulse for effort for no other reason than just the way it makes you feel like you're doing the thing you're here to do. And your shadow, you can either look at as your kind of your runner-up, or very often there's a more nuanced relationship between your shadow and your primary. And that is this: you do the work of your shadow in order to be able to do the work of your primary better. Quick example, I am what I call a maker scientist, maker primary and scientist shadow. Now I'm all about making stuff, but inevitably in the process of creation, I hit a wall, I hit a problem, I need something solved. So I'll sort of drop into my maker or my scientist side of my brain and say, okay, how do I figure this out? How do I release myself from this quandary? How do I go deep into this particular problem? And then as soon as I have what I need to go back to the more generative process of creation, I'll shift back into maker mode. So excited to dive into this topic for so many different reasons. It's kind of like the center of life in my mind. One of the longest running studies on human flourishing, the Harvard study, and also known as shorthand as the Grant study, basically tracked a whole bunch of people. It was actually done on men, and from what I understand, they're now in a second wave of that study where it's going to be multi-gender, which is pretty amazing. And but what they did was they literally tracked people over a period of generations in their lives and measured almost every single thing that was going on to try and determine what makes for a good life, what makes people happy, what makes them flourish, what gives them a sense of meaning. And the longest running curator of that study was once asked, of all the different things that you have looked at, of the biometrics, the physiology, all like geography, career, all these different things, is there any one thing that really stood out as being sort of determinative of a life well lived? And his answer was love, full stop. And going deeper, it's the quality and depth of the relationships that we form that really make life extraordinary on so many levels. When I think about the work that I've been doing for probably about 2 decades now, and Brendan's been doing, so many of us that have this amazing privilege of being here with you, it's really looking at these big questions. And no matter where you look, this idea of relationships and how we relate to other people, it just keeps coming back to the center of the stage. And with good reason. It's that important. There's a ton of data that now shows that, but we don't need data. We know that intuitively. And if we had questioned that in any way, shape, or form, this last 16 months have pretty much reminded people how important other people are to them and their lives, to their happiness, to their sense of flourishing, their sense of connectedness. It's been a bit of a relationship cauldron to a certain extent. And I'm not just talking about intimate partners or life partners. I'm talking about on every possible level, whether it's work relationships, professional relationships, friendship relationships, enemy relationships, compassionate relationships, companionate relationships, romantic relationships. Everything has sort of been put under the microscope recently, and we've been tested in really big ways. I know it's been interesting for me. So I have worked from home for many years now, and I actually work full-time with my wife, Stephanie, and we play different roles in our company, and our entire team is distributed literally around the country and even internationally. So we've had to learn how to work in these kind of weird different modes that a lot of the world has been forced to switch to in the last year and a half or so. And we kind of figured, okay, so this is going to take some figuring out, but we kind of have it dialed in already. We didn't really know. There was a lot of work to do. And then we're working at home. And it also is very different. We spent the better part of last year in New York City, which was a tough place to be for the first 3/4 of the year. And then our daughter, who was in college, ended up having to leave early and come home. And we found ourselves, the three of us, married with my wife and with my daughter there, working full time with my wife in the apartment, with my daughter sort of like exiled from school and home and then doing school remotely. And us in a situation, especially the early part of last year, where none of us felt like we could leave home. None of us could see anybody else. We couldn't interact with other human beings. So it was a very different experience that we really were not prepared to. But at the same time, as challenging as it was, as much as it brought up the powerful invitation to revisit how we interact with each other, how we relate to each other, how we can continue to cohabit a finite space in a way that feels both sacred and respectful, while being nourishing and alive and vibrant, and also allowing us to have our own places to go to. It's been a really interesting test. I used that word cauldron before, and I think a lot of us have felt that. And what's kind of funny is we ended up moving out to Colorado in September of last year, where we were for 9 months. And then because we wanted to see some friends and come back for a little bit, the three of us just wedged ourselves into a car. We essentially took everything that we owned, got rid of a whole bunch of stuff, and sort of sealed ourselves into a Subaru with a cargo box up on top, and literally just drove over a period of a week, the 2,000 or so miles cross country back where we're actually kind of hanging out right now in a little cottage you can probably see behind me in Western Massachusetts. And that drive was sort of it was the final test for us. Could we actually, having figured out how to be together in like this confined space in a confined world, could we then spend a week together in a car, literally wedged into a place because there was no room to move in this car anywhere, and be okay? And we were. It actually was kind of a fun, powerful experience. And it's reminded me so much about the important parts of life and the important parts of how to be with other people in a way that no matter what the circumstances happening around you bring you, the interrelational part of what's happening still stays healthy. It still stays constructive and generative. So over the years, I have had an astonishing opportunity to sit down with so many leading voices, luminaries, primary researchers in all different aspects of relationships, from love to friendship to collegial relationships, and learn from them. I've also studied a mountain of academic research because I'm a little bit of a geek like that. And I thought a fun thing to do, and hopefully valuable thing to do as we spend our time together today, was to share a little bit of things that have come to me, my own insights. But I also wanted to take a couple of the really key lessons that have been shared with me by guests on the Good Life Project podcast over nearly a decade now, that I have found to be utterly transformative on a relationship topic. So I'm going to talk about three different things and a couple of different people here. And we'll start out with something called bids. So the power of bids. Now, the notion of bids was introduced to me originally by a couple who I met, John and Julie Gottman. Now, John and Julie have been together for a very long time in their own professional and personal relationship. And they've ended up in the beginning, John was primarily a researcher. He was an academic, taught at a university, ran a lab, and he researched love. Julie was a clinical psychologist who focused intensely on relationships too. And they used to have these really fun debates with each other because John would say, this is what's happening in the laboratory. We know it. Here's the data. And Julie would say, but dude, this is what's happening in my clinical practice. Like when I'm sitting in front of people face to face, actually talking with them, it's a totally different experience. It's fun to be in a room, to watch them sort of like interact and trade with each other, like tossing the baton between each other, and see how they've built this beautiful relationship. But they introduce and they notice this fascinating thing, which is that on any given moment in time, what happens with two people in a room, whether it's romantic couples, whether it's friends, whether it's colleagues, is pretty much all day, every day, we are in some way really big and overt, or kind of more subtle and nuanced. We are bidding for the attention and affection of other people. And what John and Julie did in this sort of like long-term longitudinal research was they looked at couples, newly married couples, and they would just sort of like watch their interactions in a room. And they were able to predict over a long period of time who was going to actually stay together and who was not. And in fact, they classified these partnerships into two different things that they sort of loosely termed the masters and the disasters. The people who are very likely to stay together and have, like strong relationships, the people who are very likely to end up apart. And started asking themselves, well, what's going on here? Like, can we actually identify something that's fairly universal across these two groups of people that would be predictive on a pretty consistent basis of success in relationships and failure? Then what they realized was there was something much bigger happening on a meta level. And it was all about these bids for attention and affection. What they realized was that as we make bids for attention and affection all day, every day, there are generally three responses to those bids. One is what they call turning towards. So let's say I'm sitting on the couch and I'm with my wife, Stephanie. And I'm kind of sitting there and I'm like, oh, I have this shoulders is really bothering me. It's just really tight, right? That's very likely me bidding for a little bit of attention. And maybe I don't want to just outright say it, but things like this happen all the time, or maybe I'm opening the dishwasher and there's something, like I could use a little bit of help. Maybe I walk in, and so all the time we're sort of like making these bids for other people's attention and affection and help. Turning towards that would be something that would be acknowledging the bid and then in some way responding positively to it. So I'm turning towards the bid. Oh, yes. Like I see that's going on. Like if Stephanie's, got a headache, let me just help rub your temples. So turning towards is acknowledging the bid and then turning towards it in a constructive and positive way. That's the first response to bids for attention and affection. Second is turning away, which means you're kind of like, whether you see it or not, you choose not to acknowledge it and not to respond to it in a constructive or positive way. The third is what they categorized as turning against. And this is not only not being helpful or not giving the person the attention or affection they want, but actively being aggressive in your response to it. So if that would be, if my shoulder hurts, or I'm a little tired, I'm a little headache here, that would be not Stephanie like reaching and saying, oh, like, let me see if I can help work it out a little bit, or ignoring it, but it'd be actively saying, well, it serves you right because you're being a real idiot lately and you deserve this. So there are these three different things, right? So there's the bid for attention and affection, and then the three responses: turning towards, turning away, and turning against.
This can be your day for personal growth. This can be that day you committed to and you remember and you go, that was the day I got myself a community. I got better coaches. I committed to making my life the absolute best that I could. This is that day. Make today your growth day. Click the button on this page and sign up right now.